would Hillary Clinton say if someone had the nerve to question the integrity of our democratic elections?
Because that's horrifying. You know, every time Donald thinks things are not going in his direction, he claims whatever it is rigged against him.
Well, she's not so horrified now that she lost. Her campaign is officially saying the whole thing might have been, yes, rigged.
Of course. And it remains one of the president-elect's top priorities, keeping Carrier air conditioner here in the U.S.
Within 24 hours, they will call and say, sir, we've decided to stay in the United States. We'll stay in Indiana, or they'll go someplace else, but they're staying in the United States.
But not if Uncle Bernie has anything to do with it. The socialist senator says he has a better plan, and he's about to save the day.
Whoa.
I'm gonna sip my coffee while Bernie saves the day. Mornings are better with Bernie. Not really, but they're better with friends.
Wow.
Oh. All right, we've got a lot of news this morning. We've been having a little fun with the Christmas season in the air. But we also have the pleasure, the honor to welcome in former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, interrupting his vacation down in Naples, Florida, briefly. And we thank you for doing that, but we mostly thank your wife. You've got a new book out, Treason, a novel about terrorism, a more dark subject. But your wife, of course, has a more lovely subject. It's called Hail to the Chief, in which she has Ellis the elephant teach young children all about American presidents. And we obviously have a new president about to take power. But I wanted to first talk to you about Fidel Castro passing on. And we've seen people in the mainstream media like Chris Matthews saying he was really a romantic figure, Mr. Speaker.
Well, you know, this is a good place to test the insanity of the American left. He wasn't a romantic figure if you were being shot by him. He wasn't a romantic figure if you were being driven off the island, as hundreds of thousands were, because he stole their property and threatened to put them in prison. You weren't a romantic figure if you were, he wasn't a romantic figure if you were a poet who spent 16 years in a prison because Fidel didn't like you. Let's be clear. The average car in Cuba is over 30 years old. It would take the average Cuban who earns $50 a month 100 years to buy the least expensive new car currently available in Cuba. Now, this is all a result of socialism going amok. Bernie Sanders' exact fantasy come to life in Cuba. It doesn't work. And I think people ought to be honest about this. And any professor or any writer who says they like Fidel ought to go volunteer to spend 6 months in a Cuban jail and then tell us how they feel about this dictatorship.
Absolutely. In contrast to the United States, and even many years ago, Ronald Reagan, when he was president, obviously Fidel Castro railed against him. The New York Times highlighted that, as it oftentimes does, finds a way to hold up Castro but criticize Ronald Reagan. This is what Castro said in 1985. He said, if his power, meaning Ronald Reagan's, includes something as monstrously undemocratic as the ability to order a thermonuclear war, I ask you, who then is more of a dictator, the President of the United States or I? We know how he feels about America. We've got a new president coming in. What can Donald Trump do to set the stage for turning the page on these horrific Castros?
Well, I think he can aggressively implement the Helms-Burton Act, which we passed in 1996 when I was Speaker. I think he can maximize information flowing into the island in a variety of ways, by radio, by internet, by Facebook. I think he can also maximize the pressure on the new government and say, look, we're very clear about this. We need free elections. We need the rule of law. We need a belief that the Cuban people, not the Cuban dictators, have a future. And then Raul Castro, who has said he'll stay in office till 2018, who's already designated his replacement, the current vice president, they get to make a choice. But I don't think we should have this Obama model, which has, by the way, helped nobody but the dictatorship. I think that what we have to have is a toughness mentally about taking on the Cuban dictatorship.
So, Speaker, should the White House send a representative of this country to Castro's funeral?
I can't imagine anybody they would send unless Marco Rubio would agree to go. I mean, I think to send a Cuban American who stands totally for freedom to be in Cuba might be worth at least exploring. But to send the vice president or the president or the secretary of state, I think would be a terrible insult to the millions of Cubans who are still suffering at the hands of a vicious dictatorship.
Mr. Speaker, let's move on to the Trump transition and something you're intimately familiar with. And there is a lot of consternation, as you know, among some of your fellow conservatives that Mitt Romney appears to be, not just appears to be, but is a serious candidate to be Secretary of State. And our reporting tells us, Fox First reported a couple of days ago, that there are conversations going on in private about whether Mitt Romney might apologize to Donald Trump in some public way for basically flat out calling him a phony and a fraud. Do you think an apology is necessary here?
Well, let me first of all say I will support whoever President-elect Trump picks because he has the right to fill the cabinet based on his judgment and on his vision of going forward. So while I have very strong opinions, and I'm going to say them, that doesn't mean that I wouldn't support whoever President-elect Trump picked. I think there is nothing Mitt Romney can say that doesn't sound phony and, frankly, pathetic. He made his case. He made his case all year. He did all he could to help cause Trump to lose Utah. He called Trump vicious and vile things. He described him in language that is not possibly compatible with being together. And the idea that now that Trump has won, that Mitt would suddenly decide to issue a mea culpa and say, oh, gee, all the vicious things I said about you when you were running, I didn't really mean. Well, he sure did mean them. And he sure did try to defeat Donald Trump. And I think speaking for most of the Trump supporters, while we will support President-elect Trump in whatever he does, I think we would be enormously disappointed if he brought Mitt Romney in any position of authority.
Mr. Speaker, the president-elect has run a transparent transition process, knowing who he's meeting with and what positions he may be considering them for. But this standoff a bit or pause between Giuliani and Romney has opened the door for some potential other candidates. I think we'll be able to put them up on the screen. You've got Tulsi Gabbard mentioned, Bob Corker, David Petraeus, and John Kelly, two generals. Do you see anyone else emerging, or do you think this really is a Romney-Giuliani matchup at this point?
Look, I also think Ambassador Bolton has a tremendous potential.
Sure.
But candidly, I mean, if for whatever it's worth, in my opinion, Rudy Giuliani would be a great Secretary of State. This whole socialist baloney that the news media brings up, that he has too many contacts overseas. John Foster Dulles was the greatest international lawyer in the world when President Eisenhower picked him to be Secretary of State. They actually thought that was an advantage. Rudy has been in 80 countries. Rudy has connections all around the planet. It's an advantage to America to have somebody who's done something. I think this left-wing vision that if only you sat at Harvard, got tenure, and did nothing in the real world, you'd be the perfect candidate, is exactly what's wrong with Washington. And I think Rudy Giuliani will do as much to clean up the State Department. I can't imagine anybody who would be a tougher leader or a tougher advocate for America than Rudy Giuliani.
All right, and Speaker, something else that continues to be big news this morning is that Team Hillary, with the leadership of Jill Stein, is challenging the election results. Trump has taken to Twitter to slam this effort as a scam. But Hillary Clinton, she was horrified when Donald Trump, during the election process, even hinted that he might challenge an election if he thought it was rigged. And here she is doing it.
Look, if you were Secretary Clinton and you had spent 42 years of your life from the time you were a student when you worked for Joe Lieberman for State Senate, not U.S. Senate, 42 years, and you twice had thought you were going to be president, and you have to face Bill Clinton, who actually won, and you're going to have to think through, how do I explain that I'm a loser? You'll grasp at any straw. There's no straw too tiny for Hillary Clinton to grasp it. And it's sad. But we're watching her live out a psychodrama in public. But the fact is she lost. She lost decisively. She lost according to the rules of the game. And at some point, she will gradually disappear to write her memoirs or do something else.
Is this just an extension to discredit? You saw it with the protests afterwards. You see it now with these challenges. Where will this go next? Are they ever going to accept that President-elect Trump will be President Trump?
If President Trump governs as firmly and as courageously as he campaigned, if he does genuinely take steps to clean out the swamp, if he is prepared to take on, for example, the corrupt parts of the bureaucracy and insist on real civil service reform, if he is prepared to take on the Veterans Administration, something one of your hosts knows an immense amount about, he's going to have left-wingers mad at him every morning. This is just a fact. I mean, the New York Times will every day be apoplectic that we have Donald J. Trump in the White House because the New York Times was so desperate to have anybody else. And I think that means that the left will be in turmoil for the next 8 years. And, you know, candidly, as an observer of the American scene, I'm pretty happy when the left is in turmoil. I worry when they're happy.
But, Speaker, you know, they're using this this transition team effort as an excuse to say that the Trump transition is in turmoil because you do have Kellyanne Conway, you know, speaking out against having Mitt Romney be chosen as Speaker of the House, or Secretary of State.
Yeah. I was Speaker of the House.
Thank you, sir. Are they divided, though? Can you clear that up?
Now, look, well, I mean, first of all, this is a case where the president-elect clearly has allowed this to occur. I mean, he could have cut it off at any point. He could have said no to Romney. He could have said yes to Giuliani. Yeah. He could have said yes to Romney. And if he'd said yes to Romney, I would be supporting Romney today. So obviously, he wants to see where his base is. He's being, you know, it's interesting. He's being patient. He's being deliberate. He went to Mar-a-Lago to take a deep breath and slow down a little bit. And by the way, I have to say, I had never seen this before. I just ran across a 2011 video of Donald Trump working in one of his hotels and being a bellman and then being a cook. And then it's an amazing thing. It gives you a totally different feel for him as a human being. And I think what he's done is, and David Axelrod, who, as you know, ran the Obama transition, Axelrod came out the other day and said, look, Trump is actually ahead of where we were at this point. All this talk about disarray is nonsense. He is looking methodically, putting together a superb team. He has very tough standards because I think he knows he's going to be in a war with the establishment in Washington every single day of his presidency. And he wants people around him who are committed and dedicated and prepared to stand by his side no matter how hot the heat gets. And I think he's going to put together a good team.
Mr. Speaker, I got about 30 seconds, but Jerry Falwell Jr., is a report this morning, he said that he turned down a cabinet post. But what I found more interesting was that he said that when he got the offer from President-elect Trump, he said that he had to commit to serving 4 to 6 years. Is this president-elect already looking ahead that he is going to be a dominant sort of Reagan-esque figure for 8 years?
Oh, I think he should be. I mean, his goal has to be to succeed, to make America great again, to create jobs and to drain the swamp. If he does all that, he's going to get reelected. If he gets reelected, he's going to serve 8 years. And I think, again, it tells you something about how he built the entire Trump empire. He wants people around him that he trusts. He's willing to put a lot of effort into finding the right person. And then he's going to delegate massively. I mean, he's going to have an entire team at work, not just one guy. Unlike the Obama presidency, which centered around this single brilliant figure, Trump is going to have an entire team that he is the leader of and he's the general manager of, but he wants the whole team there, and he wants them there long enough to rely on them.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we hope you and Calista get some time out on the golf course, and we thank her, not just you, for sharing you with us on this Sunday, and have a good rest of the vacation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Speaker.
Great. Good to be with you.
It's such a great point. Indecisiveness to one is patience for another, right? I mean, it's a great point. If you want to take some time to make the right decision, you do that. All right, one of America's top allies now turning on the West. Their ultimatum, give us what we want or we'll flood you with our migrants. Another lose-lose situation on the world stage. We cover that next.
And desperate times call for desperate measures this morning. Nancy Pelosi calling for backup.